And you've shaved for the porn stash for today's episode, right? So on that note,
So,
in the immortal words of Salt-N-Pepa, let's talk about sex, baby. From Sydney, Australia, all the way to Portland, USA, two misfits hang out after class to riff on the B-sides of professional life. These are your professional misfits. All the way from Sydney, Australia, I am your host, Christopher Sellers.
and from Portland, Oregon, I'm Brody Atbox.
And we are your professional misfits. And here we are, Misfits Season 2, Episode 8. We're talking about sex. We're talking about casual. We're talking about monogamous. We're talking about poly. We're talking about never. um, so here we are. So look, let's be mature and get disclaimers out of the way. Like, this isn't necessarily an R-rated or 18 plus episode. This is going to be an objective, mature discussion about sexual relationships. So please, I'll try and keep the puns to a minimum and snickering and everything else, but we are professional misfits. There is a professional element to what we do. So Brody, let's start with a real simple, honest, easy layup question. Why is sex so taboo? Why is it so forbidden to talk about in, like, let's culturally within relationships? What's the deal, man? It's obviously it's the most common practice in the world. Everyone's doing it. We all know. None of us would be here, if it wasn't. So,
You
what's
know
the
what's
big deal? Yeah.
it's funny because one of my first questions to you is it taboo over there? I don't know. I don't have a
All right.
great scope of the worldview. I do have friends globally, but
Yeah.
I can only speak for what it is here. And I'll say this. I think more so it's I don't know if circumstantial is the right word, but it's who you're around, because
Mm.
there are certain healthy elements of people talking about sex and the relationships and what that does, and healthy views of it around children too, because that's a thing too. Whether people want to talk about that or not,
Yeah.
it's so there is some open honesty here, but it is very taboo. It is, on the general sense, it is something that you just don't talk about. It's nobody else's business.
Yeah.
It's too personal. It's a lot of the times too, I feel like when you get onto that subject, especially here, right? If I were to just be spontaneously speaking about a sexual relationship, it would be viewed at, dude, I'm really trying to watch my words here, icky, almost, I want to say,
Right.
like
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what the right
Mm,
word,
mm,
because
mm.
not outright, disgust, but it's also that, like, ugh, like,
So I'll answer your question in a second. There's something I want to follow up on that vein. Is that there's a lot of sexual discussions kind of get swept under the religious rug as well, because
mm,
from
mm,
from an outsider, from a non-American, those seem to be the two extremes. You've like porn capital of the world,
yep.
puritanical. We don't talk about it. We're not going to educate our kids about it. It's not your right, and just
It's not the United States, right? The left and the right, like the two extremes.
and
And
that's
yeah.
and so for all the misfits at home, that's, we're not here to bash Americans, but it's worthwhile to have an objective view. But to answer your question, like, is it different here in Australia? It's interesting because Australia seems to get a reputation when it comes to sex, that we're a bit more open minded, and I think we're a bit more open minded and perhaps a bit more mature about it. Like, it isn't, something that only happens behind closed doors and like we don't talk about it. Like, we seem to be a bit more relaxed. Sydney, in particular, is like the gay capital of the country. Sydney Mardi Gras is the one of the largest gay events in the world, and that happens here. So I can speak for Sydney and most of the capital cities, and that's not just for. Look, I'll use queer in the loving term because that's how all my gay and lesbian friends describe themselves. Like queer just encapsulates that. It's not just with queer relationships, also with straight relationships. There seems to be a fairly mature approach to it. Not to say, but I mean, again, the reason we're having this conversation is there's still an acknowledgement that sex, even monogamous relationships, which are deemed the norm, aren't really talked about. So anything outside of that corridor of vanilla normal, so like poly relationships, which have kind of become more popular in the last 5 to 10 years, probably get into that. If someone's bisexual, casual sex seems to be so hot right now because everyone's on social media and apps, and we talked about that, probably a couple of episodes ago. And then, there's the complete flip side to all of this, which is abstinence, and even like dare we touch on incels, which is something else entirely. But I think when it comes to attitudes to sex, I have a question about sexual education in the States, and like, is it a thing? How young does it start? Because for context, I remember being like, even growing up in Singleton, which is blue collar mining town in the Hunter Valley, about as white as it can get. But I do remember that being in primary school, so even as young as maybe 8, 9, and 10, being taken to sex ed evenings at my school. And my parents, particularly my dad, would take us.
Way.
For real,
you
bro.
Say 9 or 10?
Yeah.
No,
I mean, I'm in primary school, for real. So this is well before. Okay, so this is well before high school, and we're educated on, this is male anatomy, this is female anatomy, and this is, what babies are. And look, as much as
that's high school.
Okay, that's okay. We're having this education well before high school. In my experience, and this might differ around the country, but
in my eyes is healthier.
I would, immediately I thought to one, like, I wonder why, but then I thought also as well, education is obviously a deterrent, isn't the right word, but it's a mitigating factor to things like teen pregnancies. And
absolutely.
So again, like in the Hunter Valley, in the country where you've got nothing else to do except drink, smoke weed, and go roll in the hay. And for context, again, Singleton, the town that I grew up in, had the most number of pubs per capita, the most number of hairdressers per capita, because all the guys' wives and girlfriends need somewhere to get their nails done. And it also had the worst drug and alcohol problem in the state. Why? Because there is a ton of blue-collar money, and Newcastle is an hour away, and like, where else are you going to spend it? So that's the sort of area that I.
This sounds like the Australian St. Helens, my friend. This is bizarre.
Hey, but so again, and so I have no other context other than my own, and this is why I guess why we're exploring it. But I'm telling you, like, before primary school, well before adolescence, and something about. Undoubtedly, we'll get to role models for like relationships and sexual relationships and what we deem normal. Like my dad, who might have had a lot of other criticisms or like observations of his life as a man, as a father, and I can't imagine it was, I don't know, comfortable or whatever, but he would still take both me and my brother to these things because, like, this is essential education that you need, and to be raised right and to be educated.
What was this like? An additional class, like you guys had to kind of sign up for this? Or?
Yeah, I think so. Like, this is well outside of curriculum, right? So, sometimes at your school, like, you'll have after school events or whatever. So this is probably, I imagine it was the pamphlet was handed around to the parents. You signed your consent. You'd say, yes, you be there, whatever. And then you go for, 2 evenings for an hour each. And that was that. Excuse me. But that was definitely a thing. And so, and you're saying that wasn't your experience in the States?
No. I mean, and still even now. So look, we're at such a weird spot where the environment around that subject is filled with contention because, and look, this is not the conversation, so I won't dive too deep into
Yeah.
that. But the stuff that's going on with sexual preference, transgender, that kind of thing right now, and where that gets introduced, right, where that discussion is allowed to be had,
Yep.
is it's such a boiling point that anything around the subject with sex and children is just not, it's not going to work. It's just, people aren't going to take it for what it is. And so here, no, I mean, I can
Interesting.
be, yeah, and I can be honest with you. I think not even in middle school was there like an official health class or biology class. Middle school, so that's sixth, seventh, eighth. That's what is that? That's like 11 through 14.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Okay. Okay.
I'm dead serious too, and that's where I'm like, this is fucking bizarre to hear you say that, because I think I would sign my kids up. I think I would, because I didn't get that exposure until I was 16, and you're putting fucking condoms on bananas in fucking health class, and
Funny, man.
it's your first fucking exposure to this whole thing. Now, look, it's funny because that's kind of where the American culture around it is reciprocated. It's stuck in this cycle where it's like we don't talk about it until we're this age, and then when we get to that age,
When you're already in puberty and
we're already there, and it's
willing to try
awkward. It's a
everything.
difficult fucking weird conversation to have because you haven't
Yeah,
had
right.
any fucking means of information beforehand. You're just thrown into this world that is really truly an adult world.
Yeah.
And
has real consequences.
100%, but we aren't. Yeah, that so no. Yeah, high school I'd say was my first real educational exposure to that kind of thing. And
That is interesting.
and look, I'll be honest with you too. Speaking for me personally, I don't know many parents out here, and just mine. They did a great job in the sense of explaining what it meant for a relationship. They did a great job in explaining almost explaining the consequences and the reality, the gravity of the situation. But at the same time, because it was such a one-touch topic, we need to check that box.
I was going to ask, did you ever get the talk?
Yeah, totally. And I feel like it actually came in two stages. So it's funny that you mentioned getting the actual education from someone that knew how to give it around that age, 10 or 11, right? So that was kind of the first birds and bees talk for me, is because you start seeing shit in media and you go, what is sex? What is sex? Why are people naked and kissing?
Why is everyone angry about it? Yeah.
Yeah. When you walk in and you're watching a movie, your parents are watching a movie and they're all naked. You're like, what the hell? What is this? And you want to know. So that was like the first, I think, conversation with my parents, and they explained what it was, where babies came from, and how the whole system works. You know what I mean? And then again, was not talked about until I was moving closer to that stage. So I'd say probably even like 12, 13 again was the next conversation that was like, hey, we notice you're starting to hang out with girls. This seems like where your attention is at. Let's talk about this. And that was the consequences conversation, the gravity of the action. Right.
Yep.
And yeah. So they did what they could within the system that they were given. You know what I mean? Because it's still, I think for them, and even me as a parent, we have trouble deciding what we will and won't talk about on a casual level with our kids, because it's tricky. You also don't want them going to another set of parents or school and being like, oh yeah, my parents talk this way, or they tell me about this, and then it be something that negatively affects their experience, because that's not the norm, right? Because it's just simply not the norm.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting to someone like me, because I, again, don't have kids, so I have the luxury of, hypothetically, I would be fine with my kids having more knowledge and perhaps a different view and a different scope on something
Mhm,
than,
mhm.
I guess, being ignorantly naive, which is, and I guess,
Very well put. Very well put.
but I'm saying
Because there's an
without
absolute
kids,
level of ignorance
you
there
know,
in keeping the information from, right?
right. And again, it's, yeah, I'm sure it's absolutely relative to every parent and every child and all those sorts of things. But similarly, like my experience with my parents is there was never, I don't think there was ever the chat, because to what you described, like we took you to the 2 evening seminar, so that's covered. Check. I don't think it was until I was maybe like 13, 14 or something. I remember this distinctly because I remember my mum asking me, like, do you know what a lesbian is? And I'm like, yes, mum, I know what a lesbian is. So, and a few other little bits and pieces. There's never been any sit down talk of birds and bees or anything like that. But I will. But before we leave this
And
concept
back
of
when we couldn't fucking Google it, people.
right, yeah, exactly. And there was,
Kids nowadays, like, you
yeah,
fucking got a
like,
dictionary at your fingertips.
and you're trying to censor every second website on a phone, like, unbelievable. But I think before we leave the concept of parents, what was I going to say? That's right. I was lucky in as much as that despite having heterosexual parents and being heterosexual myself, my folks weren't openly discriminatory against any
Mm,
other person for their relationship. Again,
mm,
I'll say this, and it echoes in relationships that my old man, took us for all different types of food, and like if we saw someone and like they were dressed differently or they had longer hair or like Sikhs, have their hair up and in a turban and all that sort of stuff. And as kids, you're naturally like, that's what are they? My
yeah.
old man would have an answer like, oh, they're Sikh, they dress like this. Oh, they're Hindu, they've got the dot here for these reasons. Oh, they're Chinese, they do things this way. So there was always a really objective. So I'm super, super, super grateful that I wasn't just passively raised racist or bigoted in some way. And I can say that is equivalent to get any relationship that wasn't purely monogamous heterosexual, right?
Mm,
That, and
mm.
then when I started studying in the arts, you figure out everyone's a little fringe, sort of kinky, like queer, whatever. Anyhow, but again, you have a choice. You can be like really uncomfortable and be like, or you can just go, everyone's actually pretty cool, and who cares
Mhm.
who's fucking who, um,
It doesn't
right?
matter. It
It
just
doesn't
doesn't matter.
matter. It doesn't matter. So on that, it's interesting, isn't it? Interesting, isn't it, that monogamy, sexual monogamy, is the standard, is the benchmark, is dictated by marriage. That these are the conditions that one must enter into a union. And does it work? Straight up, like, does monogamy work for relationships? When we look at the other options, even if it's okay, monogamy seems to be the benchmark and the sacred cow that no one's allowed to touch. However, we know that people cheat. We know that prostitution has existed for all time and shall continue to, because people will find ways and conditions and excuses around monogamy to kind of, right? So we know all of this stuff is going on, but kind of to your point, like, we'll plead ignorance or just kind of turn a blind eye to go, oh yeah, but don't talk about OnlyFans. Um, I totally love my wife. It doesn't matter that I go and pay, a 20-year-old to spank me or something like this. So straight up, like, does monogamy work?
Mm. I would actually argue in some cases that it does. So it would have to be it's circumstantial again, and it's subjective almost, and that's something we talk about a lot here, where
Mm.
we try to come to a conclusion. We end up going, is there one? Is there a conclusion? So for me, in my eyes, I think
Okay, does it work for you? Does it work for you?
I'll start there. I don't share. I don't share. I don't share. Um, again, I'm not sure if that was my cultural exposure. I'm not sure if that's conditioning. You know, I'm really not. I can't answer that side of it for you. But who I am now is I couldn't share.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it wouldn't sit well with me being the person that is. And it's funny that you mentioned OnlyFans too, because, you know, we're talking about sex, right? And a lot of people view that as the act of, but
Mm.
there's so much around that, you know,
Uh,
it,
Trust, communication, honesty. Like, is it cheating if I message or whatever else? Like,
oh, oh, 100%.
yeah,
And then even the things where it's like OnlyFans, it's like, you know, that same thing, that's sex work. You know what I mean? Like that's sex work. Well, let's call it what it is. And
it is an industry. People
yeah.
are paid. Yeah.
Yep, 100%. You know, and I think if it was me, right, and I'm talking again, moving back to the sharing thing, if my partner were to be one that was in that position to where they wanted to share themselves avidly with the world, it just wouldn't sit well with me.
Hmm.
And look, I'll explain it like this, and it might make me sound possessive. It might make me sound, you
Everyone's
know,
allowed to
however
have
it
a
does.
preference.
Right. Um, again, I don't want to share what's what's sacred between us is that bond that isn't accessible to everybody, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so if I can hold that space and you can hold that space, we hold that space for each other, there's something deeper in it too that is the choice, right? I choose you. I love
Yep.
you for your body. I love you for the way you feel. I love you for the way you make me feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I can live with that. You know, I can live with that. I'm also, you know, at the point in my life and experience too, where it's like, this is just me being honest. Sex is great, right? But it's also not the fucking hype train I think a lot of people think it is.
Brody Ipox calling it like it is, ladies and gentlemen. Please
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah. The guy with a bunch of kids. Um,
You've had sex. You've had sex at least 4 times.
yeah. So, you know, it's, look, it's like you talked about and mentioned the sub pieces to that category of sex, the emotion, the trust, the communication. I've had some, let's say, not great experiences around that side of it. You know, so to where even we talk about monogamy and that being important, sex itself has its own importance in a relationship to me. You know, if it's used as a manipulator, if it's used as
Yeah.
a tool, if
A
it's
bargaining
used,
chip.
no thanks. You know what I mean? I I'd rather not. And
I I have a question then that kind of neatly ties this together, and it goes back to what you were saying before, that the sexual connection and commitment that you have with a partner is something that you want to keep sacred. Like, that's what
mhm,
we have between the two of us, and that's ours.
that's ours.
I
That's
Yes,
ours. Right.
I totally get that and respect that. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on, is need sex be that thing for everyone? That kind of connection.
Hmm.
And
Interesting. No, I mean, no, I wouldn't say that that needs to be that way. No. And that's why I said to you at the beginning of that explanation, I think a big piece of that for me is that it's subjective.
Mhm.
Because I know my preference isn't the same as others. I know there's other people out there that think monogamy is an absolute joke. I actually I feel like there's a lot more people that in the current landscape of the world feel like monogamy's not real.
Sure. And I mean, we'll get to this probably later in the episode, and I'm also going to call out the dude bros and the massive subculture that like thinks it's hot to bash on monogamy. 'Cause, like, to go back to exactly what you were saying, it's the overhype of sex and sexual relationships.
Totally.
That's the flip side of it. It's like, well, monogamy's fucked, and like guys just aren't built that way. It's like, fuck off, bro. Like, it's we'll get into that. But before I want to tell a story. I want to tell a story before we lead into that. So ask me if monogamy works for me, Brody.
Does it? That was my next question. You know, for
Okay.
you,
Thanks for asking.
as someone that's in, you know, the single world right now, you know, is that the premise that you would come into willingly, or is it not working? Is it not working?
Okay, so I guess the easy answer up front is monogamy is an option for me. I'll tell you how I met my ex. This is what's funny. So we used to work together. I might have been dating someone long term, then broke up, then started this contract gig, then met my ex. So she kind of knew me. She knew me by reputation. Anyway, so when we started dating and sort of things started getting serious, let's say about a month or 2 or 3 into it, I remember sitting down in a cafe in the city, and I went, okay, I like girls. And she's like, yeah, I know. I'm like, yeah, but I really like girls. And she's like, yeah, I know. I'm like, all right, what do we want to do about it? Right. So it was an open, so for everyone.
Wait. Were you guys already kind of?
Yeah, like we were dating. Okay. It was just us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's like, so
had
what do
anything arisen yet where it was, you know, she might have had to face that directly with
No.
that? Oh, okay. Cool.
No, because even for me starting out, like if I'll put a pin there, because I know when we talk about poly stuff, this is where I'm going to separate the differences from people who think they know what the fuck they're talking about and people who just want attention. So sitting down on a table and saying, what do we want to do about it? Because this isn't, again, like, ladies and gentlemen, sex involves at least 2 people. So it requires consent from at least 2 people. So whatever the dynamic is, it's always healthy to discuss it. You know, if I came to the table and said, look, I'm not monogamous, this is just the way it is, you have to deal with it. I mean, not only is that narcissistic and selfish and completely self-centered, and if you want to be with someone like that, fine. I'm in a relationship with someone. We're building this together. Let's talk about it. Now, so her response is actually what's really fucking interesting. She sits there and she goes, like I know you, and I knew what I was kind of getting myself into. So I think if I don't know about it, I'll be fine. It's like, if you don't tell me before, I won't get jealous and shitty. But if you tell me afterwards, I'll actually think it's kind of hot. And I'm like, all right. And so this was, now, this wasn't the green light for me just to go out and tag everything, because of course I'm with this girl and I like her and I respect her. So even though you say one thing, doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, I'm allowed to go and eat everything on the buffet with no concern for how you actually feel. But this began sort of the premise of our relationship. But even the fact that we could talk about it, that this was an open discussion, that if, you know, a pretty girl flirted with me, or if I noticed someone on the street or whatever else, she wasn't going to lose her mind because she knows that I'm with Chris and Chris is with me, and that's all that fucking matters. You know, that was the premise. So going back to what we identified with you with, like, look, sex is this thing to me where it's just ours. With my ex, like, this connection with her and this understanding and this transparency and that honesty, that was the thing that was just ours. Now, you know what's really, really sexy about that is because I had that with her, I didn't want it with anyone else. Right? So if I saw a pretty young thing in the street, or someone came up to me and said, hey, you know, blah, 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 I'm like, cool, babe, thanks. That was that, you know. Now, that worked for me. That worked for us at that time. Similarly, this might not work for everyone. When we were at work and we were sort of casually talking about our relationships or whatever else, we were always looked at like, you're the weird ones, because, you know, she could actually trust me. I would be where I said I would be, and then I would come home and it would just be me, and no, I'm not out. You know, it was really, really funny. It was really, really funny. We were the odd ones because we had open transparency and communication. That was Yeah.
Hmm. Interesting. 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 I don't even have. That just threw me off. You know, that's you're completely right. It's not the norm, and I'm not saying that as in opposition of it. I don't think
No, I
there's anything
understand.
wrong
Like, I
with it.
understand. But, and this is, and okay, this is the tip of the iceberg. Where things, so we were together for about 5 years, and where things sort of eventuated, which is where it kind of gets a bit more interesting, is let's say about a year into the relationship or whatever. She says to me, like, oh, I think I'm bi. I think I'm kind of into girls. And I'm like, okay. Has this always been a thing? She's like, yeah, I think it has. I'm like, how come it hasn't come up before? And she's like, I've never actually been with a guy that was secure enough to handle it.
Hmm.
But, all right. And then again, it was another talk of, well, what do you want to do? You know, is
Hmm.
this something that you want to pursue, or you just, you notice that you like pretty girls or whatever else? She's like, I don't know. And then, so fast forward a few months, and she's, now this is where it gets interesting. Fast forward a few months, and because let's say we
This
basically,
is where it gets interesting.
okay, but by comparison, you'll see. So fast forward a few months, and she's on a few apps, and she's going on dates with girls, and she might, you know, hook up with a few or whatever else. But then she'd come back and she'd tell me all about it. She goes, you know what's fucked? I'm like, no. It's like, okay, so I'll go there, and they know that I have a boyfriend, and I've told them they have a boyfriend. They're like, yeah, cool, cool, cool. What about you? She's like, oh yeah, like I've kind of got a boyfriend too, or a husband or a fiance or whatever. And she'd be like, cool. Do they know about it? She's like, oh no, like girls don't count. Right,
Excuse me.
right. So here's
Your girl
where,
was tapping all the fucking sick or all the fucking married
yeah,
moms. Like,
all the cheating girlfriends, all the cheating fiancés. And again, like we're the weird ones because we can be open and
because we're honest about it.
Because we can openly discuss it without what the fuck, like I'm not enough of a man for you. She's like, none of that shit. And she'd come back, it's like there's so many, and they qualify it like that, like our girls don't count. So
Can I ask you something while we're in the thick of it? And it's funny too because this may or may not, Misfits, be an episode. Was jealousy a factor ever?
No.
I mean, really? Oh my god!
Okay, so
again,
it crosses,
maybe that's my cultural, conditioning. But like, I think I don't know. I think even if it was another, I'm not competing with a man. I'm not competing with a man. Which weirdly, I'm much more comfortable with the idea of not competing with a man. But I'm also like, dude, what if she ended up liking? I don't know. There's some level of
that's valid, and obviously I can't remember, but I'm sure we would have had those conversations through that point because I remember asking her like, well, you know, are you into other guys? Like you're looking at? She's like, no, you know, it's like you're it. I'm like, all right. And so when the way the way she explained it, she's like, look, girls are fun. They're kind of a sometimes food, but yeah, you know. But and it was always hilarious because she would find that she'd have the same problems with girls that any of us dating girls, straight girls, would have. She's like, they're such fucking princesses. They can't make up their mind. Like, do you want to fuck me or not? Like, are we going back to your place or not? Like, what? Like, what are you doing? Like, you don't know what you want. You don't know where you want to go. You know, all this sort of shit. It was hilarious to hear it from a girl's perspective. But was I guess to answer it, like, was jealousy ever a thing? No, because of what I described earlier. It's like because we have this connection where we're being open and honest and transparent about it, then the actual act of sex was sort of independent or separate from that connection, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the trust became it just as intimate as
right.
The act
it was
of
the trust. Like if you started hiding it from me, you know what I mean? Or sort of making excuses to sneak out and see.
Is that what was sexy? Because now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, right? It's not so much because you had mentioned she would say listening in on it after the fact was mildly sexy. I feel like you same time, hearing about it, but it's not that you're like, oh, I'm enjoying replaying the instance. It's that intimacy of honesty that is just so real and visceral in the moment that like that's what's sexy. You know what I mean? That's what you're.
Yeah. And look, and even though there was times that she's like, oh, hey, look, this girl that I'm dating, like, she wants to meet you. Do you want me to bring her home? And I'm like, sometimes I'd say yes. Other times I'm like, you know what? She sounds like a princess, and I'm not in the mood for princesses. And she's like, yeah, okay, sure. That was that. But look, whatever the connection that we had at the time, it worked. And look, it was healthy because it was all consensual. No one was getting hurt. No one was lying. No one was hiding something. No one had a need that they couldn't express. It wasn't vindictive. No one was cheating. None of that sort of stuff. So, but I guess again, what worked?
Freedom with security is what
Yeah,
I'm hearing. And
yeah,
which is like, holy shit, that's what I think anybody wants, and whatever that looks like for the individual, right? But that's, I think, what we're all searching
right.
for is
And
freedom
now,
for
and now, could I
individuality.
get that with someone else? I don't know. Um,
Get that with someone else? You
well,
mean the same relationship dynamic or the
that's
result?
that's that's the thing. It's like I don't know. Like I'm single now, and so if you're a cynic at home, you go, it didn't really work out for you, did it? It's like, no, yeah, but the relationship fell apart for entirely different reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with our sexual relationship. Um, so moving forward, it's again, I'm going to go back to that original coffee table chat of like, it's going to be a discussion between myself and some other girl of what do we want this to be, because we're independently going to shape this thing, like irrespective of what people say, think, do, wherever I am in the world, blah blah. Like this is, to what you were saying, this is about us. What do we want to do? you know
So then let me ask you a theoretical here. If you had a woman that you had connected with, and I mean deeply, right?
yep.
Instant connection, you guys are there. Monogamy is important for her. What is that?
Hmm.
What does that look like for you? Is that a
That's a fair question.
sacrifice? Is that what you know what I'm saying? Like what?
I do.
Because yeah,
I do. Um, I don't know. It's a fair question. There's an analogy of, you put a dog in the backyard and you lock the gate, it'll jump the fence every time. You put a dog in the backyard, leave the gate open, it'll happily just roam around in the backyard and never leave. I'd hate to think that I'm that sort of guy. Maybe I am. I don't know. Like I don't I don't respond well to authority or conditions. I do prefer unconditional love. So if monogamy was important with unconditional love, then okay. You know, if I was being told, I was briefly in a relationship with someone, and we were out somewhere on a date, and then my someone called and it was a girl, and I'm like, hey, yo, whatever, had a quick chit chat, then put the phone away, and then she's like, who's that? Who's calling you? And I just went, what the fuck? Like, who are you? I'll talk to, like, I am entitled to my privacy. This has got nothing to do with you. And that was the complete instant turn off. Like, if you're going to try and control me, if you're going to try and guilt me or whatever,
Okay.
um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah.
And also, like, let's not take things out of context. Like, if you're shit, if you're getting involved with me, I don't think you're signing up for vanilla, like, in life.
I'd agree with
Right.
that statement. Yeah.
So that's right. So if you want to hook up with Brody, he's got 4 sons and he's got responsibilities and he's got priorities and criteria. If you're looking for something a little less traditional, then I'm probably more your flavor. Uh, but yeah, and even the fact that we'll talk about it. You know what I mean? There's a lot of grown women and men that won't talk about it, which, okay, so hearing my experience and comparing it to the, I guess, the norm of monogamy, then how does poly sit with you? How do polyamorous relationships sit with you? So for those at home who might have a vague understanding, basically, poly means many, amorous means love, so many lovers. But traditionally, with most poly relationships, there's a primary. So, Brody, you might have a primary partner, but you might live with 2 or 3 other people that you're sexually involved with, and have friendships with and everything else. So, on paper, it seems like the ideal world, right? Where you can have a primary committed partner and still sort of have some little casual fun on the side or whatever. So that's not always how it plays out. We're about to get into that, but I'm interested to hear your perspective on what your opinion of poly is and what the general, I guess, opinion of poly relationships are.
Yeah. I'd say it's something that, again, cultural exposure there is low. So it's
Fair?
something I don't have an understanding of, a deep understanding of. It's something that I don't have experience with. So I don't know. I'm tempted to say, live as you are and it doesn't affect me because it doesn't, right? But if I have to apply myself into the situation where somebody I was romantically involved with said, hey, I'm poly, this is my world, this is where I want to be. Again, I think I think I'd have trouble with it. I think I'd have trouble with it, and it would read to me that then I'm not your person and you're not mine.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying,
No.
and that has nothing to do with
everyone's allowed to have a priority, preference. Yeah.
Yeah, and it has little to do with the integrity of that person. It's just me saying I know emotionally the dynamics that kind of situation would present. It would be difficult for me. It'd be difficult for me to manage. Yeah. So I'm not sure. Do what you do, but I don't think I could do it. I personally don't think I could do it. And look, that's even like, so for all the misfits out there too, where it's like those relationship dynamics are always massively different. You may have polyamorous relationship where it's dude and he's got 3 girlfriends and they are committed to him and each other. You may have 2 dudes, 2 girls. That's all this kind of things. Again,
you might have all boys, you might have all girls.
Right. Yeah. And again, to me, where I think, and maybe this is an insecurity that I have not acknowledged, but I don't know if I could compete in that scenario. I think there's too many things in my mind that would become that way for me personally, even if there was a disconnect on some level to where I could compartmentalize, this is what it is, and I love this person and they love me. Yeah, I think it would be too hard. I think it would be too hard.
That's totally fair. And it's a more reasoned explanation than most poly people will give you, if I'm honest. Now, I'm a cynic to the poly community for this reason, is because we seem to have a lot of 20-year-olds, a lot of alternative 20-year-olds who are declaring themselves as poly. And what I read that as is really you just want to have a whole bunch of sex with different people. Fine. That's not poly, sweetheart. Or you want to have casual friends or casual boyfriends. That's still not poly. And it similarly, it screams of insecurity. Like, you can't bear to be alone. So I'm going to have like a whole bunch of satellite friendships and satellite relationships and satellite sexual partners that kind of make me, so I can bounce from one to the other if I'm not getting something from somewhere. And that's a really poor explanation and use of a poly dynamic, and kind of gives it a bad name. The minority is similar to what you described, where there's enough trust and communication with, let's say, a couple, that they then decide together, maybe someone else to bring some spice, or to do whatever, or to be a sexual part, or whatever it happens to be. Let's bring in a third. Let's bring in another to enhance this relationship in whatever capacity. That takes, precisely from what you're describing, that takes a lot of self-reflection, a lot of trust in the partner that you're currently with, a lot of communication, and a lot of sort of understanding of rules and dynamics. Because that's the funny thing is as well. It's like, it's not monogamy. The rules seem to be fairly straightforward, but everyone breaks them and cheats them and tries to get around them. poly and other relationships aren't absent of their own rules, and that's something that I think a lot of people should be aware of. Like going back to my ex again, she was like, if you're ever going to hook up with anyone, she changed her mind as she sort of matured on, well, as we were together. Like, she's like, look, yeah, let me know where you're going to be, and let me know sort of who you're with. Or actually, if you start talking to someone, let me know, because this way. So in the beginning, it was, I don't want to know, tell me later. And then probably about a year or so into the relationship, she's like, no, actually, like, bring me into that loop so I don't feel like you're hiding something from me. And she's like, and if I change my mind, I might change my mind, but be okay with that. I'm like, yeah, it's fine. She could even be open about, like, my mind might change. I don't know. I might get insecure about it. I'm like, that's cool. But she was never passive aggressive. She was never, where you been, who you with. She never got bitchy afterwards. Yeah.
So again, talking about, that was kind of your example of a poly relationship. And again, it doesn't sound unhealthy, which is just so strange, over here to where it's like you're talking about. I think it's that surface level, casual, I need the satellite relationships, and I'm using this more than I'm living this. How often did you guys, how often did a situation arise like that where you were with another girl? Or
it was so variable. Like, it wasn't the Playboy mansion by any means, but look, the point is, it was flexible. It was flexible, and we're open about it, because, like, we both worked contract, and then towards the later of our, and like, I'd be on a film set for a month, or then she'd be on something because she'd be working as AD or whatever, and then come back and do contract. So it was all this sort of stuff. So it was, the thing is as well, like, never went looking for it. Never. That's the other thing. Like, I wasn't driven to it by dissatisfaction by whatever I had at home, which is so often the story, or the story that's or the story that's suppressed in relationships, right? Like if you want to champion monogamy, like, what about, like, the hundreds of thousands of relationships that just ground it out because you should, and it's the right thing to do, and it just dying inside, and or because I have a theory that, like, whatever you don't address, like, it simmers out in other ways. It simmers out in other dysfunctions, right?
I think so.
Whether emotionally, psychologically, even physically.
I was going to say, even fucking physically, I'm sure shit manifests. Yeah.
So for me, I wasn't driven by dissatisfaction. Sorry. It would either sort of present itself or it wouldn't. And besides, look, man, like, I don't. She probably went on more dates with girls than I did, if I'm honest.
Okay.
And she probably had more, because she also had more tolerance for princesses than I do. And that's the other thing as well. If that's a whole other story. Like, you're that guy, you have an open relationship. Wow, how does that work? And I'm like, pass. Look, if okay, so we've ticked off. Okay, we've ticked off monogamous. We've sort of any other questions around poly or anything else like that?
No.
Casual sex, Brody. Why is it so bad? Why do girls get shamed? Why do girls get shamed? Why do bros get applauded? Why is casual sex evil? Why is everyone doing it anyway?
Yeah. So
there's a lot to park on your table. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't live in that world. I would be absolutely naive to act like I don't see it from outside in. I think the thing is, and we kind of touched on it a little bit in the acknowledgement of the poly relationships and people that are trying to play that game, right? I love that term that you use, that satellite kind of relationship, or that satellite,
Yeah.
satisfaction, whatever it is that you're keeping in orbit, that's not actually attached to anything. It's
And
just
also,
floating, right?
and doesn't allow you to commit to anything, and also doesn't allow anyone to commit to you.
No, absolutely the fuck not. And the thing is, I think you show up dishonestly in that environment. I think more often than not, because of the, and again, this is from outside in, I think because of the persona that you have to express to that kind of demographic or that kind of world, and it's not you. It's not you. And I'm not saying that there might not be pieces of you that you show up as, and you've got your style and whatever. I just think, like we're talking about, for you and that relationship you were discussing, for me, a huge piece of that was the trust. Like what I was getting from that from you was the intimacy, was the trust. And like, that's so cool and real and visceral. And then same thing on my side, where, I operate on, the something being sacred between us, something, right? And like, you acknowledge something. When you're in that kind of environment where it's all bets are off, it's like you said, I have no commitment to anything. So how can I expect someone to commit to an idea of me, right? Of me. What am I? Like, what am I to this person? And the word that I constantly feel in my brain that's attached to that, it's just a hollow place to be. It's just hollow. It's again, because sex is great. Sex is great when you're doing it with someone you enjoy and someone that knows what the fuck they're doing. So, you know what I mean? So just sex, right? Just sex is not this amazing thing. You can't just go fuck a million people and 999,000 of them are going to be fantastic.
You are going to have a lot of bad sex.
Folks. A lot of bad fucking sex. You might even fucking hate sex by the end of it. You know what I'm saying? That's so that pursuit of
I once right there, it reminded me of a time I hooked up with a girl once, and we hooked up a couple of times, and she was never really into it. And so one night when she came over, I'm like, "Hey, do you even like sex? Like, let's talk about it. Do you even like sex?" And she's like, "Ah, you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, baby, time. Let me get you a cup of tea. Let me call you an Uber. This is, so yeah. But I was gonna, yeah. So I look, I agree in principle that sex is better with someone that you have a emotional, psychological, chemical connection and attraction to, and that, misfits of all ages, takes time. Like, even if you are married, or if you're in a long-term relationship, flash back to the first time the two of you had sex. It was probably sort of awkward, and you probably sort of giggle about it, to where you are now, because you've come to sort of learn and trust and open up with each other. Now, having said that, I would venture to say that, like, not all casual sex is bad and evil, folks. There's off camera, before we did this episode, I recited 2 people, their entire titles and their name, who I've hooked up with for one night stands, because I remember them to this day. There is, that's stories perhaps for another time. But I will go out on a limb and say these are the tips of the iceberg, 1% minorities, as opposed to the ton of horror stories we all have, or just like average fucking hookups that you don't want to remember, right?
So that's what I'm saying to the Misfits. It's like, and when I'm not trying to like downplay sex. I love sex too, right? No, but what I'm saying is we talked about it. We talk about vanilla a lot. You're going to run into a shitload more vanilla than you are going to run into your brand of spice, right? So it's That's the overhype there. That's the overhype. There's so much more average than there is fucking this crazy life, world changing.
Yes. And it would be naive and I think irresponsible of us to discuss sex and how it shapes relationships without at least briefly touching on porn, to say categorically for anyone that's listening on all the platforms, don't judge your sexual relationships or even just any of your relationships by a porn standard, right? It is such a warped, like, okay, porn
I love
is
that you're going there, and this
cool.
is the angle you're taking.
Yes, porn is the Michael Bay of filmmaking. It is unrealistic. It is loud. It is photoshopped. Everyone's buff and fit and wearing amazing clothes and clean. Like nothing goes wrong, right? You don't see any of the outtakes. You know what I mean? And everyone's having an amazing time and it's just full throttle for however long, right? That's not life. That's not relationships. I will speak with a fairly seasoned degree of experience that's just not fucking realistic in any sense of the word. And unfortunately, with social media, the life we live, access to adult content, OnlyFans, all these sorts of things, because it's more in the mainstream now and it's more prevalent. These are sort of the standards that seem to be passively adopted by a culture and by boys and girls. And to bring this full circle is that if you've got teenagers, to Brody's point, who aren't sexually educated until they're well within their adolescence, they already know how to use a phone. They already know how to Google anything and everything. So they're getting educated from somewhere else. And that's their first impression. So I would ask, what would you prefer a child's first impression of sex to be? An educated one or a Michael Bay car crash?
That's a clip. But
I'm not suggesting one's wrong, and I'm not, that's not what this is about, but let's be realistic. All right. And this goes as well for all the bros, all the fucking Chad bros who think they're smashing everyone and everything and they're players. Like, the funny thing is, guys, the people who are getting laid, they don't talk about it.
Yep.
They're not advertising it.
There's no need to. They're being validated in their own ways.
They're busy.
Yep.
And they're respecting people's privacy.
Yep.
Because I want mine to be respected, for instance. So, like, grow the fuck up. The Tates of the world, grow the fuck up, man. Anyway.
Yeah, no. Beautiful, beautiful spot to wrap that up. Because, I mean,
good timing.
Realistically, that's the same sentiment that I have. Misfits, just don't do it. I mean, in my mind, that's where I'm at. If you have to, sure, but it's the same that you and I have talked about social media, about content in general, about anything. Take it with a grain of salt and take it for what it is, right? And like you said, it's an inflated highlight reel that has nothing to do with the essence of reality and what actual sexual satisfaction feels like. And what I mean by that is it's fucking subjective, Misfits.
100%.
Go figure it out for yourselves. Don't watch a fucking video to try to get there.
Well done. Episode 9. Do you know what's coming up?
Dude, stop doing this.
Every time. It's become a gimmick now.
I know this is gonna be a thing. They're gonna say, "Oh, he didn't remember."
No, take a drink every time Brody doesn't know what the next episode is. But this is actually we can turn it into a thing because we can probably do this in real time on the episode right now because episode 9 is the episode that the Misfits voted for. Right. So if you really quickly pull up the stats from whatever platforms that I've got the LinkedIn group here. I know you put this out on Facebook. There was a couple of votes, and then you said you got a ton off Insta and TikTok.
Yes. Yeah? Okay. So
while Brody's doing the research, Misfits, every little mini arc that we do, every group of 5, there's an episode that we give you guys to vote on. Last mini arc when we're talking about professional relationships, you voted to hear criticism. This time around for episode 9 for professional relationships, for personal relationships, the 3 options we gave you were like, A, do you want to hear about cheating? Like, should we ever cheat? Should we never cheat? Is it a bad thing? Are all people cheaters? And all that sort of stuff. B was, should we talk about exes? So can you ever really be friends with your ex, or should you burn that bridge? Or C, should we talk about jealousy? So personal and professional jealousy, how does it affect you? The ugly little green-eyed monster, right? Last I checked, it was a showdown between B and C. So whether we talk about exes or whether we talk about jealousy. On the LinkedIn group, the Professional Misfits page on LinkedIn, we had 2 votes for jealousy and 1 vote for the exes. So far, jealousy's winning. B, where are we at with the rest of the world?
Okay. We actually have a tie over here between A and C.
Ooh!
But it doesn't matter because those are tied for second. B is the overall winner between Instagram, Facebook, and our LinkedIn.
For real. All right, so we're exes. Shit.
I guess.
I spent half the episode talking about one ex. But while it was good, maybe I can talk about all the trash stuff and how we don't talk now and how she's got a dirty coke habit. But
this is interesting. Yeah, so you guys are getting this in real time. That is real time. Yes. Those are stories that went out this morning before our production today.
24-hour deadline, all that.
You guys voted, and exes.
Exes it is. All right, so episode 9, we're going to be talking about exes. And can you be friends with your ex? Or what if you got kids, you have to maintain some sort of relationship? Or are you like me and you carry a set of matches and a little canister of gasoline every time you leave a relationship? B, how do you think this is going to go?
Oh, I can tell you, I'm that same one. Where's the gasoline? Where's the matches? Because I'll say, if you're my ex, you're my ex.
That's it. You're an ex for a reason. You're an ex for a reason.
Yes.
All right. So that's coming up next week. Misfits. In the meantime, you can listen for free and you can watch us build every Wednesday, GMT, on YouTube's and the Spotify's. You can catch all the content that Brody slices up and passes out on the TikToks, on the Instas. You can go to the Professional Misfits page on both Facebook and LinkedIn if you want to vote on episodes and chat and hang out and get all the other extra benefits. And you can get all the episodes 2 weeks in advance and super secret merch to be coming soon, which we're starting to piece together, but I can't talk about it because Brody says I can't talk about it. But there's merch coming for the Patreons, so get ready, yo. Have I missed anything? ProMisfitsPodcast.com. That's our website. That's where we are. Fantastic. On that note, I've been Chris.
I've been Brody.
And you stay classy, Misfits. Have all the sex you want. We'll see you on the next one.